The Big 12 is getting itself more money by changing its name. Is that going to help anything?
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth: realignment, coaching carousel, the portal, and so much more. We've always got you covered. So the Big 12 is looking at a new name, the All-State 12 Conference. Gosh, that would sound really, really weird. My first reaction was, why? Why would they do? Then my second reaction was, well, I mean, if it's ensuring their survival financially, if it helps keep them competitive, then perhaps that could make some sense. I joined Locked On Big 12's Drake Toll, and here's what that sounded like.
Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to a Locked On Big 12, Locked On College Football crossover. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. That is Spencer McLaughlin from Locked On College Football. Thank you for making our shows your first listen every single day. Off the riff, the Brett McMurphy report, Ross Dellinger right there behind him, about Brett Yormark wanting to change the name of the Big 12 and effectively sell the league's naming rights and become the All-State 12, or I would love like the Southwest Airlines Southwest Conference would rock. Spencer, I'm going to come off the riff here and say, as the Locked On Big 12 host, this is going to happen. This isn't like Brett Yormark's going to put it to a vote amongst presidents. If All-State comes to the table and says, we'll give you $250 million for a 5-year naming rights, 10-year naming rights, the Big 12 is in a financial spot where they have to do it. And I don't think Brett Yormark alludes to this if it's just a thought in the back of his head.
Well, I think he could. I just think that it is highly unlikely. I would put it at well over a 50% probability if I'm going off of my gut instinct, for two reasons. Number one, when have we been in the habit recently of maintaining traditions of college football? That's the first thing. Sure. And the second thing is, when the almighty dollar is in play, how often have college leaders, athletic directors, president, whoever, gone away from the money, said, more money? Nah, we're okay. We're good. We're not going to pursue that. We don't need it right now. And then you couple that with the fact that the Big 12 is facing a financial deficit compared to the other leagues that they're, already behind. And I don't think that you can afford not to do it. Like, no matter how small of a dollar amount it is, it's still in the millions of dollars per school. And that's a hard sell to go back to your league and say, hey, I know I could have gotten you another $2 million for your athletic department, or whatever the number comes out to per school. It's not some big number. What reasoning would he be able to give them to say, yeah, I said no. Right. I said no, because the conference, which would still be referred to as the Big 12.
By everyone.
No one were like, obviously we'd have, All-State or whatever company it would be, the Shake Shack 12, whatever you're looking for and whatever you're trying to pursue. Like, that's all good and fine. But, how can he go to those presidents and say, I had an opportunity to get you even a little bit more money, but I said no? I just don't see that taking place. So it's strange. It's odd. My first reaction was, why? My first reaction was, why would you possibly do this? But then I thought about it more and said, you know what? Anything you can do that in the grand scheme of things is not actually very consequential to close the media gap, even if it's a small amount, I think you have to do it, because what's the alternative? Keeping the gap as big as it is? I just don't. I don't see that, because this is how much it would be right now, but how much would the next one be if the Big 12 or whatever conference it would be called? What if that, really starts to take off and grows in valuation? How much would the next naming rights be worth?
The John Kurtz take on Twitter. John Kurtz is a friend of the program, been on a couple times. A lot of people who listen to this show or any college football show know the name. Says, I guess my question to the people that really hate this, and here's where I sit. If you are just
it's me. I hate this. Go ahead.
If you are slamming your head against your desk going, oh, no, please don't change the name. What he presses is, if you can't hit the $22 million in rev share number, you're going to start hemorrhaging players to the Big Ten and the SEC. Are you cool with truly becoming a minor league by 2025-26? I don't think that the naming rights thing is going to change the Big 12 from a minor league to a major league when it comes to the Big Ten and the SEC comparison. I don't. I think that's a little extreme. However, what is the power of a net? Like, we're already calling it the Big 12 and it's 16 teams. That's a misnomer within itself. Who legitimately is going to lose sleep if the logo on the field says All-State 12? I don't care. Like you said, this show is still going to be called Locked On Big 12. Everyone's still going to call it the Big 12. Might as well get some pocket change. Is there power in the name?
There's not enough power to justify not taking the money, because what is the value? It's such an established brand, like you said. Everyone's still going to refer to it. Look at Twitter, for instance.
Yeah.
Okay, I joke all the time on Locked On Ducks. If you want to send a mailbag question, hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. No one refers to it as X. That's the only...
Literally Twitter.com. Pull it on my left. That's Twitter.com still.
This is the... That's the only way that I ever refer to it as X, and it's a joke.
Yeah.
It's a joke. If I'm just talking with people, it's Twitter. Like, oh yeah, I was reading Twitter is amazing. Like when Scotty Scheffler got arrested, I wasn't talking about how X was the funniest place on planet Earth. I was saying, yeah, Twitter was hilarious.
Yeah.
Like, it's still going to be referred to as that. That's never going to go away. And I don't think that it's quite the same as sports stadiums, because that's kind of the other comparison. Is a sports stadium, for example, my beloved Seattle Mariners play at what is now T-Mobile Park.
100%.
I still often refer to it as Safeco Field. I don't think even the names of stadiums are quite as ingrained as the names of conferences.
Yep.
Like that takes so much. It just takes a lot for that to just go away. For everyone to forget that it's actually the Big 12, as long as the league exists. If we go to a super league one day and everyone just kind of joins up.
Only pushback. There are 8 new teams that aren't Big 12 teams. Like when we talk about the new, like the American Conference,
but they still know the Big 12.
We create a new conference. We have built a new conference with the Big 12. 6 of these teams were Big 12 teams 13 years ago.
You've built a different version of the conference. It's still the same conference.
10 of these teams were not Big 12 teams. 12 years ago. 12 years ago.
But think about how long everyone has known it as the Big 12, even those who haven't been Big 12 teams, right?
Southwest Conference. You make the same about Southwest Conference.
Utah's new to the Big 12, but see, even then, I think it's different going from the Southwest Conference to the Big 8 to the Big 12. Was it Big 8 and then Big 12? Do I have my history right there?
Big 8 kind of merged. That's
yeah. So I think even that is different because there's the corporate element. Because when you have a corporate component and it's just, an advertising money, that's different than going from the Southwest Conference to the Big 12, or going from, for instance, the Pac-8 to the Pac-10 to the Pac-12. That even is different because there isn't a financial component built into the words that you're saying. Even though there's obviously a financial component behind expanding your league, there is just a different feel to it. To me, it comes off differently. So
Pacific 12 versus Duke's Mayo, 16.
Yes,
right?
These changes are not the same, because there were those that remembered the Pac-8 or that remember the Big 8, for instance. But do those people still refer to it as the Big 8? How many people, until its dying days, referred to it as the Pac-10?
Yep.
Not very many. But there wasn't a corporate component to it, and that, I think, is the difference. I think the Twitter comparison is more one-to-one in that, can you name a single person, anyone listening to or watching this show right now, do you know a single person that you interact with in your life who calls it X and not Twitter? Because I don't. I do not know one human being who would say, yeah, no, I sent out a post on X recently. No, I tweeted. That's it.
I also don't know a single person who doesn't use eBay Motors in my life. This is Locked On Big 12, Locked On College Football crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, whatever you want, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Big wins. The biggest wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. How much pressure is on Lane Kiffin to make the playoff in 2024? Let's talk about that with Steven Willis, Locked On Ole Miss. I think Kiffin has done a great job setting big expectations for the Rebels this year, Steven, but I have heard other national pundits and college football talking heads describe Ole Miss as a window program where you build up over the course of several years. You can't be a title contender every season. Certainly, Ole Miss on paper's got a roster that can push for an SEC championship and a playoff spot this year. Do you feel like this is a window that might not be open in 2025 like it is this season?
You know, I do kind of agree with that. Ole Miss football is taking kind of a college baseball kind of working towards a specific year. Like if you have a really good recruiting class in college baseball and you know they're not going to be there past their junior year, you're obviously building up through those freshman and sophomore years and trying to make a run in that junior year. And this year does feel a lot like that. Now, it's not entirely the same, but I do think there is a little bit of truth there because this year is completely playoffs or bust for Ole Miss. If you want a good season, if you want the season to be acceptable to the fan base, you have to make the playoff. If you want the season to be considered a great season, you have to host a playoff game. Anything below the playoffs, it was not a successful year. And that is such a weird thing to say whenever you realize we're talking about Ole Miss here. They've never made the SEC championship game, much less the playoff. And we're talking about the playoff situation as being playoffs or bust. And that just is a testament of what Lane Kiffin has built, honestly.
Let's examine both sides of the coin with regards to the program right now. Make the argument as to why Ole Miss does make the playoff, why they break through this year. And by the way, I'm not saying that I have made such comments about Ole Miss being a window program, but Steven did say it. So if I do say it, Ole Miss fans, you can't get mad at me. But if Ole Miss breaks through that proverbial glass ceiling, not necessarily into the SEC championship game, because they could go 10-2, win all their non-conference games, and make the playoff without having to play for an SEC title. I think 10-2 in the SEC in all likelihood gets you in. If they have that season, go over that 9.5 win total, according to our friends at FanDuel, how does it play out on the field that's different from years past where they prove people wrong?
Well, the offense it remains intact over what everybody knows from a Lane Kiffin offense. The offense from 2023 is back. They've even added some pieces we always talk about all the time. They replaced Quinshon Judkins in the aggregate. They went and found yardage and things like that to replace his production. So this offense is going to be fun. The difference is going to be instead of a 42-38 game that Lane Kiffin teams have been known to have, this defense might be a top 20 defense in the entire country. It might be a 42-17 game. And that is going to give Ole Miss a little bit of, margin for error moving forward for what they can do with this year's team. And if you look at the talent on this roster, it can be argued, and pretty well argued, that behind Georgia, Ole Miss has the second best roster in the entire SEC. When you look at a year 3 quarterback, potentially the best wide receiver core in all of college football, a first-team All-SEC tight end. The offensive line has significantly improved. The defensive line has the chance to be the strength of the team with 2 first-round draft picks potentially playing on that side of the ball. Chris Paul moves down from Arkansas to provide some leadership and go sideline. He's a really good player. They added some pieces in the secondary as well. This is a really good roster, and I'm going to show my age right now, but Ole Miss's roster is kind of like whenever, I was in middle school and you'd get the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue and Kathy Ireland was on the cover. That is what Ole Miss's roster is right now. And the importance for Lane Kiffin is to not mess this up. Don't wreck the Ferrari this season. And I think that he's trying to do that through various chemistry things. I think they have a really good makeup of seniors on this roster. I think Jackson Dart, he has a magnetic personality. They got players like Jared Ivey. They've got really good leaders built up on this team. And I just genuinely think that all of the pieces are there for Ole Miss to make a playoff run. And like I said, for Ole Miss to have an acceptable season this year, they have to at least make the playoff.
What happens if it's what you would deem an unacceptable season? What if they go 9-3, miss a game, or miss the playoff by a game, and it's one of those contests that is a back and forth sort of affair and comes down to a game-winning field goal maybe, and the other team makes it, your guy misses it, or something like that? What if that's the difference between Ole Miss making and missing the playoff? How do the fans in Oxford then feel?
I think Kiffin takes a little bit of the blame if that happens. We've all put this up at this point. Somebody has to be the fall guy, and it's naturally going to be him. Jackson Dart has a chance to be the greatest of all time quarterback if he gets Ole Miss to a home playoff game. Greatest of all time. If he does not make the playoffs, Jackson Dart will not even be a top 5 quarterback. That's the swing of what the fan base would take from this playoff run. Now, it's possible. Like, there's some tricky games on Ole Miss's schedule this year. Ole Miss could lose a game at night in South Carolina. I talked about this today with Andrew Leon. That's a tricky game. Bye week going in there. Ole Miss plays LSU the next week. It's on the road at night.
The look-ahead factor. Never overlook the look-ahead factor for a college football team.
And for an Ole Miss team that has never been in this situation in my lifetime, you have to go back to people that are over 70 years old to when they remember that Ole Miss has dealt with this situation before. But people my age, this is completely new. So Ole Miss looks ahead at South Carolina, or Ole Miss looks ahead at Fayetteville, or Ole Miss looks ahead against Oklahoma, and you have the road game at Tiger Stadium. You have the Georgia Bulldogs. 9-3 is something that can legitimately happen and is what Ole Miss has to fight against, because I think the real thing that Lane Kiffin has to do, Ole Miss has the talent. They have the horses. Lane Kiffin was brought in to get Ole Miss the horses to compete. That's why he was brought to Oxford, because that's as high as the powers that be at Ole Miss has ever done. They need let's get the guys to compete. Well, he did. He's the first coach that has legitimately done that. Now he has to teach these people that, hey, you're where you're supposed to be, handle business, and do the Nick Saban football robot thing a little bit, to where you just go take care of business. You do like Kirby Smart. Do you remember when after Georgia beat TCU by 873 points and the linebacker or whatever for Georgia came out there and was like, you all thought we would win six games this year? And everybody just, what? How did they get you to believe that? You were the consensus number one. Every vote. You were the best team in the country by a mile.
It's one of the greatest pieces of motivation from a coach I've ever seen.
Yeah, he's just fantastic doing it. Lane Kiffin is going to have to prove that he can do that. And because all of this rat poison that we're putting on Ole Miss before the season, and we are putting it on Ole Miss before the season, it has to be dealt with.
It's coincidental that you use the term horses that Lane Kiffin has brought in. As I look outside my office window, there are literal horses running around in the field. I see Walter Nolan going by. There's Jackson Dart over there. Chris Hardy, the newcomer, he's joining. And if you think I'm making this up, no, there are literal horses out where I am looking right now. Steven Willis, Locked On Ole Miss. I want to get you one very, very quick final thought here. What's the worst record you think Ole Miss could have this season?
9-3.
9-3. The worst he thinks Ole Miss could do.
4.
Check him out on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Steven Willis, Locked On Ole Miss. Thanks, Steven, as always.
Take care, bud.
We're going to talk about Syracuse next. And what's the biggest game on their schedule? New coach, new quarterback. What's the most important game on their schedule? That's coming up next. What is the most important game on the schedule for Syracuse this year? That's a team in the ACC you don't hear a whole heck of a lot about. That is Jackson Holzer, Locked On Syracuse, one of our newer shows here at the Locked On Network. Check him out on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. My take on the Syracuse schedule for the most important game, Jackson, is Pitt, October 24th. It is the third of 3 consecutive road games. Syracuse plays their first 4 at home, and then they have a stretch in the middle of that schedule where they play 3 consecutive road games. The Q's win total, for those who don't know out there, according to our friends at FanDuel, is 7.5. I bet you that's higher than you expected it to be with a new head coach and a new quarterback we'll talk about. But the reason I think Pitt is the most important game is it's off a bye. You're not going to win every road game. And the previous matchup will be against NC State on the road. I'm going to pencil that one in as a loss for Syracuse. But the week after they play Pitt, they play Virginia Tech at home. And the Hokies, even at home for the Q's in the JMA Carrier Dome, it's not going to be an easy bout. They're one of the leaders in the country in returning production. There are big hopes down there in Blacksburg. And if you don't win that game at Pitt, you could be staring down the barrel of 3 consecutive losses, and it's hard to have a really positive, momentous season when you have 3 straight losses. So that's why I look at Pitt, Jackson, and say that's the most important game on Syracuse's schedule this year for first-year head coach Fran Brown.
Well, first of all, Spencer, thank you for having me on.
Of course.
I would say for Syracuse football, not that any of your points are wrong. Pitt is certainly an important game, but I would say it's even earlier than that. The second game of the season against Georgia Tech at home, in my opinion, is the most important game.
I considered it.
When you look at their schedule and their first 4 games of the season, there's only one game where you actually think they might lose. Like, they're going to beat Ohio at home. They're going to beat Stanford at home. And I said earlier today on the podcast that you can dress the second and third teamers against Holy Cross. You don't have to play anyone.
Don't sleep on Stanford. Sorry, what?
They're still going to beat them.
Okay.
I was talking about Holy Cross, though. You don't have to play anyone.
Oh, I know. No, I know you were talking about Holy Cross.
That's time for me to play.
You just glossed, just kind of glossed over the Cardinal there. Look,
no, but
I'm not saying they're a contender, but I don't know if they're a bottom dweller.
I think they should beat Stanford at home. It's the one game, though, in their first 4 that kind of gives me a little bit of trouble. It's Georgia Tech at home. I just think with Fran Brown and Kyle McCord, there's going to be so much hype, and they're going to beat Ohio. But then that first ACC game, Georgia Tech's not the greatest team in the world, but it's that first ACC game. How do you match up against a team in your conference? They might be a middle-of-the-pack team this year. They were a bowl team last year. So I think it's Georgia Tech at home.
Yeah, I think Georgia Tech is I don't think Georgia Tech is an easy matchup because Brent Key has got a pretty good thing going down there with Haynes King coming back, and Georgia Tech, like Syracuse, frankly, has got bigger aspirations than most people would normally prescribe to, an ACC landscape that feels like it's, 4 or 5 teams deep vying for the conference championship with maybe a dark horse or 2 into the mix. And, Syracuse is one of those teams that can win games that you feel, at least historically, new head coach, new era, maybe things are different now. It feels like they can win games that you don't expect them to. They've upset Clemson a time or 2 in the last decade. But they can also lose games where you're doing one of these. For those on podcasts, I'm scratching my head because you go, well, how can you play at that level? But you can't beat that team over there. A lot of ebbs and flows for this Syracuse team. Do you expect that to continue this year?
Well, that's the big question. I don't know. That's tough. You do have probably their best quarterback in over a decade. Fran Brown has brought in some dudes. They got a very solid transfer class for Syracuse purposes, very solid recruiting class as well. But to say that they're going to break that recent trend, the reason also why I said Georgia Tech, though, is because it kind of gives me that feel from a few years ago under Dino Babers when they had Rutgers at home in week 2 after they started 1-0. Ironically, they were playing Ohio in their first game. That was a road game, though. And they lost that Rutgers game, and they ended up going 5-7 and missing a bowl. Because, to your point, they can beat anyone, really. They can also lose. Typically, Clemson was like the one team they would really play tough. And then when they play against those elite teams, they lose. But if you look at their schedule, where's the elite team on their schedule?
Miami.
That's about it.
Virginia Tech and NC State.
I'm not willing to give them NC State and Virginia Tech.
I don't know if I would say they're elite. I would say if either Virginia Tech or NC State appear in the ACC championship game, I will not be shocked.
I won't be surprised either, but I wouldn't call them elite teams in the country. Maybe Miami is the only elite squad. But to your point, like, they could lose at Cal. Like, they can easily lose that game.
It's a long trip.
Why? I don't know. They can lose at UNLV. Like,
well, Cal's not a bad team. That's why.
They can lose at UNLV. Like, you don't know. I personally have them at 8-4, but I do think they're probably going to have a slip up or two at some point in the schedule that you're not expecting to have.
The newcomers that everyone's aware of, at least for those that are diehard college football fans, are Fran Brown getting his first chance to be a head coach. He was the DB coach at Georgia most recently. Brings over Kyle McCord, who was the quarterback of an 11-1 Ohio State team last year. And Ohio State said, we don't want you anymore. That wasn't any good. Sure, you were one drive within likely getting us to the college football playoff, but not good enough. And frankly,
he's not a first round NFL talent.
Yeah, he's not a first round NFL talent. I don't know that Will Howard, or in fact, I know that Will Howard is not, but that's a different conversation. Those are the newcomers people know about, Jackson. But what else should people know about this Syracuse team? Who else makes an impact that gives you the belief to say this is an 8-4 ball club for a first-year head coach?
I think the guy that everyone's sleeping on is Fadil Diggs from Texas A&M. That was actually their highest-ranked transfer that they got in. But Kyle McCord's the quarterback from Ohio State, big name, and Fran Brown is one of the best recruiters in the country, so he kind of takes a lot of the spotlight. But Fadil Diggs, it finally seems like Syracuse got someone on that defensive line who feels just like up to the task. This was someone last year who was second on his team in tackles for loss and an SEC obviously in the SEC, right? That's the best conference in college football. I'm not here to debate you on that. It is.
I don't know who's going to debate you on that. I'm not going to.
Listen, when I went to school, there were people telling me how great the Big Ten was. It's not better than the SEC.
Nope, it is not. Anyway, the depth is not there.
In past years, Syracuse would get transfers from the SEC. They would get them, but the difference is that those guys were almost like the dropouts of the SEC, the guys that really couldn't hang. Fadil Diggs, you look at mock drafts of him, he's a mid-round pick in the NFL draft. If you look at it in the mock drafts right now, if he has a big year, maybe he goes higher than that. Maybe he goes lower than that. It's really early. We're in June. But Fadil Diggs is the guy that I think a lot of people are sleeping on right now who's going to make a real impact on the defensive line next year.
What's the worst case scenario for Syracuse record-wise this year?
5-7. Like they miss a bowl game. There's too many. ESPN recently gave a list of the easiest schedules in the country among the Power Four conferences. And Syracuse was number one. So they have, in their opinion,
number one? I guess
number one. The easiest schedule in the country belongs to Syracuse. That's what it is.
I think it's because of your four toughest games, your four toughest opponents on paper. You have three of them at home. I would imagine that's part of it. Miami, Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, all at home. You got NC State on the road. You got Pitt on the road.
And they're not playing Clemson. They're not playing Florida State.
Yeah.
And last year they had to play against North Carolina with Drake May. And they got annihilated in that game because they could not stop Drake May. It wasn't a fair fight.
This year I think you'd actually rather play North Carolina than a lot of other teams.
You would rather play North Carolina without Drake May. But last year it was a penciled loss that you had to go into Chapel Hill and you're playing Drake May. You knew they were going to lose that game. They had no chance. But this year, it feels like every single game on their schedule, with, in my opinion, the exception being Miami, could go either way. So 5-7 is worst case, and I feel like that would be a massive disappointment. FanDuel has them right now at 7.5. I would say slightly over at 8. I do know that there are people who are more optimistic than me who think that this team can win 9-10 games. I am not willing to go there, but I would say 8-4 is a reasonable expectation. It would be a very solid year one in the Fran Brown era. And the worst case, they go 5-7, and that would not be pretty.
Jackson Holzer, Locked On Syracuse. Check him out on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Jackson, appreciate the time.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and a great weekend.